The village of Mbuyuni was quiet, surrounded by green hills and red soil. Most of the houses were made of mud and thatched grass roofs. Life was simple. People farmed, herded animals, and raised children under the same sun that watched over them for generations. In this humble village, 2 girls were born just weeks apart, Sarah and Suzan. Suzan's family lived in the biggest house on the eastern side of the village. Their house had a metal roof and a cement floor, something that many villagers admired. Her father, Mzee Mtingwa, was a respected cattle trader who owned many cows and goats. Every morning, Suzan's mother would milk the cows while Suzan played with her younger siblings. Sarah's house, just across the narrow footpath, was smaller and made of mud. It had 1 room, shared by her parents, and later just her mother. Her father, Bakari, was a local carpenter who earned little. They had no cows, just a few chickens, but their hearts were full of love and laughter. The 2 girls met one afternoon when they were about 3 years old. Suzan's ball rolled into Sarah's compound. Sarah picked it up shyly and held it. "That's mine," Suzan said, marching over with her hands on her waist. Sarah didn't move. She stared, holding the ball tightly. Then suddenly, Suzan smiled. "You want to play?" Sarah nodded slowly, and that was the beginning of a friendship that no one could break. From that day on, they were always together. Whether they were picking mangoes behind the church or jumping ropes made from banana fibers, they laughed together, cried together, and sometimes even fought over toys and sweets, but always forgave each other quickly. Even the villagers began to notice. "Hawa watoto ni kama pacha," an old woman once said at the well. "These children are like twins." Despite their friendship, life treated the 2 differently. In the morning, Suzan would come to school with neatly packed lunch, rice, chicken, sometimes even a juice box. Sarah often came with nothing, or just boiled cassava wrapped in a banana leaf. One day in class 2, Suzan saw Sarah chewing slowly during break. "Is that all you have?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "We didn't have enough food at home today." Without a word, Suzan opened her lunchbox and gave Sarah half of her chicken. "Eat, we share everything," she said. Sarah looked at her gratefully. "Thank you." And so, Suzan always shared and Sarah always appreciated. But their bond would soon be tested. When Sarah turned 5, her father Bakari fell seriously ill. There was no money for the hospital. Sarah would sit at his bedside every evening holding his hand. "Baba, will you take me to the big city one day?" she asked once. He smiled weakly. "Of course, my little star. One day." But that day never came. One cold morning, before the sun rose, he passed away. Sarah didn't understand it at first. She walked into the house and found her mother crying silently, holding her father's cold hand. "Why is Baba sleeping so long?" she asked. Zina hugged her daughter tightly. "He's gone to rest, my child. He's not coming back." The funeral was simple. The whole village came to pay their respects. Suzan held Sarah's hand the entire time. "Don't cry," she whispered. "I'm here." After the funeral, life changed quickly for Sarah. Her mother became both mother and father. She did odd jobs, digging farms, fetching water for rich families, and even washing clothes to feed Sarah. They sold their 2 chickens to pay for school uniforms. Despite the hardship, Mama Zina never gave up. "You must go to school," she told Sarah every morning. "Your brain will open your future." And Sarah listened. She studied hard and always came first in class. In contrast, Suzan didn't care much for books. She was bright but lazy. She loved dressing up, chatting during lessons, and drawing hearts in the corners of her exercise books. "Math is too hard," she would complain. "Let me show you," Sarah would say patiently. "You just need to understand the steps." Sarah would sit with her after school under the big mango tree, explaining long division or reading English passages together. "You should be the teacher, not me," their teacher, Mr. Baraka, once joked when Sarah corrected a mistake on the board. As years passed, their friendship only grew stronger. They went to the same primary school, then the same secondary school. They helped each other get through puberty, heartbreaks, and the teasing of village boys. But even as they laughed together, some villagers began to whisper. "Why is Sarah always helping Suzan?" one woman asked at the market. "That girl is too smart to waste time with a rich girl who does nothing." Others defended them. "Friendship is not about money," said another. "They grew up like sisters." And so, from childhood to adolescence, their bond held strong. But the day would come when life would test that bond, not with poverty or school grades, but with betrayal, jealousy, and choices that neither of them saw coming. When Sarah and Suzan completed their high school education, their dreams grew bigger than the small village that raised them. They talked every evening under the mango tree near Suzan's house, planning a future in the town. "I want to work in an office," Sarah would say with a smile, "wear a badge, carry a laptop, and send emails." Suzan laughed. "I just want to wear high heels and eat at fancy restaurants." Suzan's father gave her fare and pocket money for both of them. "Take Sarah with you," he told her. "She's like another daughter to us." The journey to town was exciting. Sarah had never seen so many cars or tall buildings. When they arrived at Judith's house, a big house with a tiled roof and a flower garden, Sarah was in awe. "This is beautiful," she said. Judith, a tough-looking woman in her late 40s, opened the door and smiled only at Suzan. "Welcome, my dear niece," she said, hugging Suzan tightly. Then she turned to Sarah. "So, you're the village friend?" "Yes, Auntie," Sarah replied shyly. Judith didn't respond. She just nodded and walked away. From the first week, the difference in treatment was clear. Suzan slept in a comfortable guest room with a soft bed and her own mirror. Sarah was given a mattress on the floor in the storeroom next to the kitchen. One evening, while Sarah was washing dishes, Judith entered the kitchen. "Sarah," she said sharply, "don't leave any food on these plates. Use soap properly. I don't want to see grease." "Yes, Auntie," Sarah replied. The next day, Judith took Suzan to meet one of her friends who worked at Simba Cement. That night, Suzan came home smiling. "Guess what? I got a job. I'll be a secretary. I start next week." Sarah clapped happily. "Wow, congratulations. That's amazing." "I know, right?" "Auntie is really connected," Suzan said proudly. Sarah gathered her courage. "Do you think Aunt Judith can help me too? Maybe something in the same company?" Suzan looked uncertain. "We can ask." The next morning, Sarah brought it up again while serving tea. "Auntie, please, if you hear of anything, even cleaning, I can do it." Judith sipped her tea and said coldly, "I'll let you know when something comes. For now, help keep the house in order." And that became Sarah's job, unofficial, unpaid, and never appreciated. Every day, she woke up before everyone. She cleaned the compound, washed clothes for Judith and her husband, prepared breakfast, and ironed Suzan's office clothes. When Suzan woke up late, Sarah helped her brush her shoes and fix her wig. "Thanks, Sarah," Suzan said casually. "You're so good at this." Sarah forced a smile. "Any time." Months passed. Suzan bought new clothes, perfume, and even started wearing makeup. She went to work and came back bragging about office life. "We had chicken and chips for lunch today, and I have my own desk. Sarah, can you imagine?" Sarah would laugh, but inside her heart hurt. She had the better grades. She dreamed of working too. But each day passed like a silent punishment. Judith never mentioned any job. She never asked if Sarah was okay. One evening, Sarah found Suzan painting her nails. "I'm so tired," Suzan said. "Can you help me finish the laundry tomorrow too? I need to leave early." Sarah nodded. "Sure." But that night, Sarah cried silently on her thin mattress. Her hands were rough, her back ached, and her dreams seemed to be fading. It had been 6 months. No job, no opportunity, no respect. But Sarah told herself every day, just wait. One day things will change. It was a hot afternoon. Sarah had just finished mopping the living room and was sitting quietly with her small second-hand phone, scrolling through social media to distract herself. She clicked on the Simba Cement Company Instagram page just to see the latest updates. As she scrolled down, her eyes widened. "Wait, what's this?" she whispered. There it was, A post from 5 days ago. "We are hiring! Simba Cement Company is looking for 3 qualified secretaries to join different departments. Deadline, 2 days from today." Sarah's heart raced. "Why didn't Suzan tell me this?" she mumbled. She jumped up and ran to her small suitcase under the bed, pulled out her academic certificates, and began arranging them. She didn't want to waste time. Later that evening, Suzan walked into the room, holding a shopping bag. "Hey girl, what's up?" she asked casually. Sarah turned, holding the printed job ad in her hand. "Suzan, did you know about this?" Suzan glanced at it and hesitated. No. When did they post that?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. 5 days ago. You work there. How can you not know?" "I've been busy. I must have missed it," Suzan replied, avoiding eye contact. Sarah stood up. "Are you sure?" "Because I know you. We've been friends since forever. You don't just miss things like this." Suzan sighed heavily. "Fine, yes, I knew. Aunt Judith told me not to tell you." Sarah froze. "What? Why?" Suzan looked down. Because if you apply and get the job, then who will help with the house? Judith said you're useful here." Sarah's lips trembled. "Useful? Like a maid?" Suzan said nothing. "I've been waking up early, scrubbing your shoes, washing your clothes, ironing your uniforms, and all this time there was a job opportunity and you both agreed to hide it from me?" "I didn't want to," Suzan whispered, "but Judith insisted. I'm sorry." Sarah nodded slowly, biting her lip to hold back the tears. "Don't be sorry, Suzan. Be ashamed." She turned and went back to her documents. That night, she barely slept. She stayed up writing her application letter, proofreading her CV, and preparing everything carefully. She knew she couldn't trust anyone anymore. This time, she would fight for herself. The next morning, Judith saw her dressed nicely with a brown envelope in hand. "Where are you going?" Judith asked, sipping tea. Sarah forced a smile. "To the stationery shop. I need to make some copies." Judith nodded and didn't ask further. Sarah left the house, head held high, heart beating fast, knowing she was about to take the first step toward changing her life. Sarah's hands trembled slightly when her phone rang the next afternoon. She looked at the screen. It was an unknown number. She answered, "Hello, is this Sarah and Demu?" "Yes, speaking." "This is Simba Cement Company. We received your application and would like to invite you for an interview this Friday at 10 a.m. "Oh my God, thank you so much. I'll be there," Sarah said, tears forming in her eyes. That evening, Sarah sat at the edge of her bed, rehearsing how she would escape the house unnoticed. The next morning, she approached Judith at breakfast. "Aunt Judith, my uncle, Baba Elia in Gongo Lamboto, called me. He wants me to visit him tomorrow. He's unwell." Judith shrugged. "You have uncles in town now?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Yes, my late father's cousin." "Well, don't stay long. We need someone to do the laundry," Judith said bluntly. The morning of the interview, Sarah woke up early, ironed her only good blouse, and wore a long skirt. She held her brown envelope tightly and left the house, telling Judith she would return in the evening. She arrived at Simba Cement's gates 45 minutes early. The building looked intimidating. She took a deep breath and walked in. Inside, she met a few other candidates, all well-dressed and carrying expensive handbags. Sarah quietly sat in the corner. When her name was finally called, she walked in with confidence. "Good morning, I'm Sarah and Demu," she said. The panel of 3 men and 1 woman nodded. They asked about her education, typing speed, computer skills, and how she handled stress. Sarah answered every question clearly and with confidence. Her voice didn't shake once. After the interview, she thanked them and left quickly. She couldn't let anyone at home suspect anything. A week passed. One sunny afternoon, her phone rang again. Same unknown number. "Hello, this is Simba Cement. Congratulations, Sarah. You have been selected for the secretary position in the operations department." Sarah screamed with joy. Thank you so much." She ran to Judith and Suzan, who were sitting in the living room. "I got a job at Simba Cement." Susan's eyes widened. What? How? Judith frowned. You mean, you applied without telling me? Sarah nodded. Yes, I saw the advert and I applied. Judith stood up in anger. So you've been moving behind my back? Lying to me? Sarah was calm. If I had told you, you would have stopped me. Judith snapped. Pack your things. I want you out of my house today. Suzan stayed silent. Sarah turned to her. This is what you wanted. Suzan looked away. Sarah packed her few belongings and called Miriam, a friend she had met at the market. Miriam welcomed her gladly. Within a month, Sarah received her first salary and rented a small room near her new workplace. It wasn't big, but it was hers. And for the first time in a long time, she slept peacefully. Life had taken a turn for Sarah. She now had a job of her own as a secretary at Simba Cement, working in the procurement department. Every morning she dressed neatly, carried her own bag, and walked to work with pride. She had rented a small room near the office, modest, but hers. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was building something for herself. Meanwhile, Suzan worked in the marketing department of the same company, but she still lived with Aunt Judith. Every evening, Suzan returned to a home where everything was done for her. Meals cooked, clothes washed, and comfort waiting. But despite that comfort, Suzan wasn't satisfied. I don't understand how you live alone like that, Suzan said one evening when they met after work. I like the peace, Sarah replied. It makes me feel strong. Suzan rolled her eyes. And strong? Alone in a tiny room with no fridge or fan? That's not strength. That's suffering. Sarah smiled calmly. It's still better than washing people's clothes for free. That statement didn't sit well with Suzan, and from that day, a quiet tension began to grow between them. One afternoon, Sarah was seated at her desk, typing out a report when the company receptionist walked in. Sarah, she whispered excitedly, there's a very rich man in the lobby asking for assistance. He wants to order thousands of bags of cement for a real estate project. He's so handsome. Sarah stood and walked toward the reception. There, standing tall in a tailored suit and polished shoes, was Stephen Quecca. He was the owner of Quecca Real Estates, one of the fastest-growing property developers in the country. Stephen turned and smiled when he saw her. You must be the secretary here. Yes, sir. My name is Sarah. I need some help with procurement details, he said. Please follow me. Sarah walked him to a small meeting room and began explaining the ordering process. She was calm, clear, and very professional. Stephen was impressed. You speak with confidence, he said, looking at her closely. Are you always this organized? I try my best, Sarah replied modestly. Before he left, Stephen handed her his card. Call me if you need anything, business or otherwise. Sarah blushed slightly but nodded. Thank you, Mr. Stephen. That evening, Sarah found herself smiling without reason. She hadn't felt this light in a long time. A few days later, Stephen called. Hi, Sarah. Would you like to have lunch with me this weekend? I want to discuss a small project and maybe get to know you better. Sarah hesitated but then said, Okay, I'd like that. Their first lunch was simple, grilled chicken at a quiet restaurant, but the conversation was deep. They talked about life, struggles, dreams. Stephen was surprised by her intelligence and touched by her honesty. I was raised by a single mother after my dad died when I was 5, Sarah said, sipping her juice. Life was hard, but I've never stopped believing I could make it. Stephen looked at her seriously. You will. You're exactly the kind of woman who deserves everything good in life. After that lunch came another one, then dinner, then weekend drives. Within 3 months, Stephen proposed. I want to marry you, Sarah, he said one evening as they watched the sunset from his apartment balcony. Are you serious? Sarah asked, wide-eyed. I've never been more serious. They had a small but beautiful wedding. Sarah wore a white lace gown and her mother, Mama Zena, came all the way from the village in tears of joy. My daughter, she whispered during the ceremony, look at you. After the wedding, Stephen made Sarah the manager of his real estate office. You have the brains and the discipline. "I trust you more than anyone," he said. At work, she handled clients, supervised site reports, and led a team of 10. She wore heels now, not because they were fashionable, but because they made her feel powerful. Suzan watched everything unfold from the sidelines. "She's lucky," Suzan told her colleague at the cement company one day. "If it wasn't for me, she'd still be sweeping Judith's kitchen." But in truth, Suzan was jealous. Her life hadn't changed. She still depended on Judith. She still took the same salary. She still rode buses while Sarah now moved in sleek cars. Then came the final blow. Sarah went back to the village and built a big, beautiful house for her mother. It had a tiled roof, glass windows, and even a small solar panel. The entire village gathered to admire it. "My daughter made this happen," Mama Zena told everyone proudly. She kept her promise. News of the house reached Suzan through social media. "Look at her now," Suzan whispered as she scrolled Sarah's photos, "acting like she's better than me." And just like that, what had once been sisterhood began to rot quietly into envy. A few months into her marriage, Sarah decided to invite Suzan over to her new home. She was excited to show her best friend what she had achieved. When Suzan arrived, her eyes scanned every corner of the large, well-furnished home. "Wow, Sarah," Suzan said with a forced smile. "This place is amazing." Sarah beamed. "Thank you. Come, let me show you the kitchen. I designed it myself." As Sarah moved around proudly, Suzan followed, nodding but growing silent. Deep down, something bitter was growing in her heart. In the following weeks, Suzan became a frequent visitor. She often borrowed Sarah's jewelry, wigs, expensive handbags, and high-heeled shoes. Sarah gave them freely, thinking their childhood bond was still unbreakable. One evening, Suzan sat on Sarah's couch, admiring herself in a mirror wearing one of Sarah's diamond-studded earrings. "These look good on me, don't they?" Suzan asked. Sarah chuckled. "They do. You can wear them to the office tomorrow if you like." But Suzan was not admiring. She was comparing. Envy was eating her alive. Then something strange began happening. Sarah started complaining